When it comes to the monkey, which is inspired by a short story by Stephen King, you can get slight Final Destination vibes based off of how the kills are done, and it's definitely going to be one of those horror movies that don't just scratch an itch but really hit the spot. So to summarize the movie, in 1999, twins Bill and Hal are gifted this strange mechanical monkey that beats on a drum. They don't think much of it because it came from their absent father, and their mom Lois, she doesn't make a big deal out of it, so it's just another thing that they gather to try to figure out who their dad is. But after winding it up a few times and people dropping dead, all from very random circumstances, they start to get into their head that this thing might be connected to it. Naturally, they try to handle it the best they can as kids, but 20 some odd years later, people start dying in random circumstances again. And now, with Hal being older and also having a child named Petey, it becomes a much more bigger issue for him, especially because he has a bit of a strange relationship with his son, but at the same time, he doesn't want to see his son die in a most horrific way to the point where he could be unrecognizable if he had a funeral. So, with that in mind, he seeks out the monkey and tries to stop its latest killing spree. So getting to the review section, the first highlight has to be the dark humor, and one of the main people who delivers the dark humor is definitely Tatiana Maslany as Lois. But as the twins' mother, she has a very strange way in trying to console her kids about the deaths that happen early on in the film, and it just leads to you getting the sense that Tatiana Maslany was definitely trying to tap into her Helena Bonham Carter kind of vibe, and with that, she creates one hilarious moment after another to the point that while other people was certainly funny, Theo James has his moments. I definitely think Tatiana Maslany really stole the show and reminded you why she consistently gets work one production after another. The second highlight for us would be the music, and one of the reasons why we dig the music, especially some of the early songs, is because it kind of gave a Quentin Tarantino vibe. And when we talk about this film, there's a lot of stuff that makes us think about this actor, this director, and how they handle things. Yet it feels like a conglomerate of all that together to the point where it's something new. And when it comes to the music, you get not necessarily the spaghetti western vibe that Quentin Tarantino usually does, but something that's more modern times. And with that, you get a sense that the music is not just there to fill in the moments, but it's supposed to be something that accentuates them and kind of, in some ways, no, it never throws you off, but it definitely kind of helps transition things as they go from one death to another or from one moment in Hal and Billy's life to another. And speaking of all those deaths, these deaths are brutal to the point that they're startling. They're never to the point where it's kind of like Saw, where it's like just gruesome for the sake of being gruesome. But when people's heads get blown off or things of that nature, it's usually something sudden to the point where it just is shocking to you. And to add on to it, it's not often the people you expect that would die, which makes it even more of a shock because you're thinking it's just going to be bad people, people who, like you see in usual horror movies, a person who was a drug addict, who was smoking, had premarital sex or whatever, and those are the people who end up dying. But with this one, it's characters you like that die, or people who are kind of turning things around in some ways. And with that, it kind of keeps you on your toes a little bit. Maybe not to the point of thinking that Hal and Petey are gonna die, but at the same time, considering one of the first major deaths, it's always on the table. Which leaves it on the fence portion, and pretty much the main issue when it comes to the monkey as a whole is that it lacks backstory on things. Like, we are told the monkey came from Hal and Bill's dad, but do we know that for sure? Because we never meet the dad. We don't get to know how exactly he may have gotten the monkey, what's the origins, like the first beginning of where this monkey came from. That whole mythology, lore, whatever, is completely missing. All we know is that it showed up, the kids play with it, so begins the kills that we see in the movie. And then on top of that, when it comes to Petey, considering the way Hal talks about and lives his life, how in the world did he attract a woman, never mind attracted a woman to the point of them having sex and having a kid? it kind of goes over your head in a way because where did he meet his ex? How did they end up dating? All of that is not touched upon. They just set up that because Hal is very fearful of people getting close to him because of what happened with the monkey, and his fear that the monkey could always come back and start killing again. He kind of keeps his distance. So, what about this woman led him to decide to break that rule or break that safety barrier and end up having a relationship? Never mind what ended the relationship is also something that's potentially worth asking. But that other side. Overall, we rather enjoyed this movie, and even though I'm not going to say it's going to be one of the best horror movies of the year, I do think that after watching a series of horror movies that just kind of scratch your itch and just feel like they're placeholders for something better, The Monkey may qualify for that one that's being better. It's a horror comedy, but it doesn't get corny. It's brutal in its depths, but it doesn't feel like it's heavily lenient on graphic kills in order to justify its existence. And while the story is kind of weak, it's interesting enough where you can forgive it.